Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Lisa Isla Chakmak. It's really good that that's in my script because sometimes I trip up on that one. And I am the Marian Michael Jaharis Chair and Curator of the Arts of Greece, Rome, and Byzantium. I am delighted to welcome you to today's program held in conjunction with the exhibition Myth and Marble, Ancient Roman Sculpture from the Torlonia Collection. We would like to thank our co-organizers for this exhibition, the Torlonia Foundation, the Kimball Art Museum, and the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, as well as the Museum Box. The works of the Torlonia Collection have been restored by the Torlonia Foundation with the support of Fondazione Bulgari. We are extremely grateful to the organizations and donors who provided major support for this exhibition. This afternoon, we are fortunate to be joined by Ned and Raynette Boschel, Ned's daughter Betsy, and his son-in-law Dave. Ned and the Boschel Family Foundation have long supported the study and promotion of ancient art at the museum, and we are honored and grateful to have the Boschel Family Foundation's generous involvement with myth and marble. And now, it is my great pleasure to introduce the speaker for today's program, Katharine Raff. Katharine A. Raff is the Elizabeth McIlvaine Curator of the Arts of Greece, Rome, and Byzantium at the Art Institute of Chicago, where she has worked since 2011. Her research focuses on ancient Roman art with a particular emphasis on sculpture, including portraits, ideal sculptures, and funerary monuments, and the context in which such objects were made, used, and viewed over time. In short, she was the perfect partner in crime for this because she knows all the things. In addition to serving as the co-curator of Myth and Marble, a project that we've been working on together for nearly 5 years, she recently oversaw the reinstallation of the Art Institute's permanent gallery of Roman art, which I hope you'll visit alongside Myth and Marble. And she was also the editor and primary author of the 2017 digital scholarly catalog, Roman Art at the Art Institute of Chicago. Katie attended the University of Wisconsin, and not only did she graduate with honors, but she was the top performing Latin student of her graduating class. She went on to attend the University of Michigan, where she earned a PhD in art history and a certificate in museum studies. And that is where our story, mine and Katie's, began. I have known Katie for almost the entirety of my adult life. In fact, our relationship, I'm pretty sure, predates our relationships with our respective husbands. Working with Katie on this project has been both a joy and a privilege, and you are all so lucky to be here today to hear her share her vast experience on all matters of Roman art, because I'm going to share a little secret with you. Katie is the brains behind this operation. Her encyclopedic knowledge of Roman sculpture and history has been critical to the success of this project. Her attention to detail, her eagle eyes to spot errors and inaccuracies, and her freakish, and I mean this with the utmost praise, her freakish ability to recall inventory numbers, dates, and bibliographic citations is truly a wonder to behold. Now, Katie grew up in the western suburbs of Chicago and has described the Art Institute as her home museum. So it is with great pride that I welcome a daughter of Chicagoland to the stage of her hometown museum. Without further delay, please join me in welcoming Katie to the stage.
Oh my God, thank you, Lisa. Wow, I should have worn waterproof mascara today. This is really wonderful. And again, I couldn't imagine having done this project without anyone except Lisa. This has just been a mind meld of you coming at it from the top and me from the bottom and meeting in the middle. And I'm just so grateful and lucky to have worked with Lisa on this project. And I'm just so happy to be here today to speak to all of you. Before I get into the topic at hand, and just because we don't normally get to do this, I also want to just take a moment to thank my family. Sorry, I'm getting all choked up. Big day. I want to thank my husband, my dear husband, Steve, who has been with me. As Lisa said, I think we've known each other a little bit longer, but almost as much as long, and has even made the trip to live with me in Rome for a year. My lovely, wonderful daughter, who is not here today because she's in school, but who is the light of my life and has been here through this whole journey and can't wait to see Roman sculpture. And of course, my parents. Sadly, my mother is no longer with us, but my dad, who is here today, and both of my parents always 100% were behind me and wanting to be a curator. And not only a curator here, but I can't imagine, even beyond my wildest dreams, that this is our biggest show. So, and of course, just thanking other family and friends here today. So thank you all. And of course, thank you to all the members for coming here today on this warm, beautiful, sunny day when you could be having some Guinness and pre-celebrating for St. Patrick's Day. So thanks for staying indoors and seeing Roman sculpture. So here we are, and I'm so excited to be speaking to you about the exhibition Myth and Marble, Ancient Roman Sculpture from the Torlonia Collection. And now, many of you may not realize this, but you are all a part of history right now, because this week marks the opening of the first special exhibition on a topic of Greek or Roman art installed in the special exhibition galleries in 44 years. So I'm 43, so this is... This is before I was born, and it was the search for Alexander, in case you're curious. So I just want to say, again, we are so excited not only to debut this historic collection, the Torlonia Collection, here in Chicago, but to serve as the inaugural stop on its North American tour. And after Chicago, as you see here, it will be going to the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth, Texas, and then on to the Museum of Fine Arts in Montreal. And so I really just want to stress here, this exhibition is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for our audiences here in Chicago. And it is because of the generosity of the Torlonia Foundation in sharing their historic collection with the world. And so out of the gate, you might be wondering, what is the Torlonia Collection? Put simply, the Torlonia Collection is the largest privately held collection of ancient Roman sculptures in the world. It comprises 622 works, covering a wide range of sculptural types and subjects. And this includes everything from portraits to statues of mythological figures to funerary monuments and huge, massive decorative pieces. There are giant basins and other things that are just too big for us to even get them here, but also relief sculptures. Excuse me. And these objects range in date from about the 5th century BCE to the 4th century CE, so covering almost a millennium. But most of them date to the 1st to 2nd centuries, which is really when Roman sculptural production was at its peak. And so in terms of the depth and breadth and quality of this collection, its holdings rival those of major institutions in Rome and in Europe, so this includes the Capitoline and Vatican museums. And the Torlonia Collection has often been described as, most recently, a collection of collections. And what they mean by this is that, so it was formed in the 19th century by Prince Giovanni Torlonia and his son, Prince Alessandro. And this was primarily through the purchase of several groups of ancient sculptures assembled in early modern Rome. And I want to stress here, these aren't just like, here's a couple sculptures here and there. These are like famed collections of earlier aristocratic families. So if you have any familiarity with these names, it's the Giustiniani collection, it's the holdings of the sculptor Bartolomeo Cavaceppi, it's the Villa Albani. These are like hard-hitting names here. And in addition to that, they also built their collection through extensive archaeological excavation on their lands in and around Rome. And so by the 1870s, the collection had been placed on view in a private museum in Rome, which you can see here in the 1930s. But by the wake of World War II, the museum had been closed and the collection went unseen for generations. And fast forward almost a century to 2014, when the Torlonia Foundation was created at the behest of Prince Alessandro Torlonia. And I love the point Lisa made yesterday. She was like, he's not a zombie, this is a different Prince Alessandro Torlonia, another name. And this was to ensure the continued conservation, preservation, and study of the Torlonia Collection, as well as another one of their properties, the Villa Albani Torlonia. And I just want to say that has an entirely separate prestigious collection, which is just a topic for another day. So now, when the Torlonia Foundation first shared its intentions in 2016 to put on an exhibition in Rome, it was something that got quite a bit of coverage in the New York Times. And you can see here, it made the New York Times 4 times. And this was a really big deal in our field because, as many of you may know, antiquities don't often make the news unless it's for like not so good of a reason. So it was actually really exciting in our field to have this sort of wonderful news, to celebrate this collection that was sort of mysterious and hadn't been seen for so many generations to be coming to the fore. And so the first project, the first major project that Torlonia Foundation organized was on display in Europe, and it was through a series of exhibitions in Rome at the Musei Capitolini, in Milan at the Galleria d'Italia, and most recently last year at the Musée du Louvre in Paris. And again, just reiterating that ancient Greek and Roman art doesn't always get a lot of attention, just in the media generally, unless it's things like popular culture, movies like Gladiator, or of course, this meme that was going around about a year and a half ago of how many times does a man think of the Roman Empire? And this was something for us that was actually pretty good timing because we were really getting going on the project, and sort of it's nice to know there was suddenly more of a surge of interest in the Roman world. Now, so this exhibition is part of the Torlonia Foundation's second big project, and this is the first North American presentation of the collection, and we are the first stop. So this is the first time that any of these objects have ever left Europe, I mean, any of them. And so this is just a really big deal. Like, I can't stress this enough. And we've really been thrilled by the early excitement and buzz around it. And in fact, you can see here there was already getting coverage in some major news outlets, even several months ago when the first sort of press releases went out. And so turning to the exhibition itself, I was just going to take a moment here to walk you through the numbers. So we have 58 sculptures, that's almost 10% of the collection. 34 of these were in the earlier presentations in Europe that you just heard about, but 24 of these works were newly selected and conserved for our project. We were really fortunate in working with the Torlonia Foundation that they allowed us to select from the entire 622 works in the collection for this exhibition, which was a really, I mean, I can't stress enough, I think, Lisa, it was like being a kid in a candy store. It was like, we can pick what we want, like whatever we want. Like, okay, you know, so thank you. So we were just, again, very grateful for their support and collaboration of allowing us to select works that would really support our vision and the stories we wanted to tell. And within those works, 9 we have newly identified, and this is something I'll talk about a little bit shortly, but we've re-identified them based on the new scholarship we've carried out with the foundation in support of this project. 5 works, there were an additional 5 that were conserved, but after further review and seeing the condition they were in, or there were reasons we ultimately cut them from the show, sometimes because of conditions, sometimes we decided later it didn't quite support the point we wanted to make. And then with the exhibition itself, we have 7 new thematic groupings, and these are across 3 separate galleries, which we'll hear about again in just a moment. They have made 1 trip across the Atlantic Ocean, and in case you're wondering, it was by plane, which is a bit terrifying thinking of all of these amazing sculptures, but we always have to remember tanks and other planes. The US military sends things across the ocean on planes all the time. So grand scheme of things, sculptures can make it too. And finally, as I said before, 0 have ever left Europe before this exhibition. Now again, a note about where the exhibition is located in the museum. And for those of you who have visited it so far, you maybe have noticed, of course, that it is not in the normal major exhibition space, the Regenstein galleries. And so, of course, many of you as members, you know the drill. This is often where the big shows are. But instead, as you've seen, most of it is situated primarily in the Renzo Piano designed modern wing. Of course, Renzo Piano is a very prominent Italian contemporary architect. And so this wing opened in 2009 and was designed to display, like, take a guess, modern and contemporary art is the modern wing. So Myth and Marble marks the first time that any kind of ancient Greek or Roman artwork has been so prominently featured in this particular part of the museum. And again, as you can imagine, this is about as far chronologically as we can get for modern and contemporary art. Now, that said, this was actually really important to Lisa and me because this placement very much underscores our curatorial vision of bringing the past to the present rather than trying to recreate the ancient past. And so this was something that really drove our installation. And so across these three spaces, they are linked by one really big idea. And for us, this idea is that ancient Romans lived in a visual culture that resonates with our own. And what we mean by this is that in ancient Rome, images, especially sculptures, were everywhere. They permeated public and private spaces in much the way that mass media does today. And when I say everywhere, I mean everywhere. I mean the forum, baths, the amphitheater, the theater, libraries, houses, tombs, sanctuaries, temples, everywhere. Sculpture was everywhere. And further to that, many people of the ancient world were, not surprisingly, were illiterate. And so the most effective way to communicate with the broader population was through images. And so the way that these sculptures would communicate was through specific visual cues. So clothing, hairstyles, different attributes, different types of iconography, motifs, all of these things would combine to create a sort of visual vocabulary. And it could communicate a range of ideas. So everything from political propaganda to more subtle messages of identity or power or authority. And this, again, was to communicate across the empire. And the last point I want to make here is also just that there was so much sculpture that it is often described as the second population or shadow population of Rome. So a lot of sculpture. And just, again, coming back to the idea of the spaces of the show, it is, as you can see here, spread across 3 different spaces. This is a total of about 10,000 square feet, so it's about the same as the Regenstein galleries. And we have, of course, the 2 main galleries in the modern wing, which are here. And then this goes into a 3rd space, this long rectangle, which is part of our permanent galleries. And one of the things that Lisa and I really wanted to stress here, because of this placement across 3 spaces, is that there's no prescribed order to encounter the exhibition, to go through it. There's no clear beginning, middle, or end. It's very thematic, it's very modular, so you can enter it from you can follow whatever path you want. We've been describing it as a sort of choose your own adventure, if that makes you feel emboldened to go wherever you want. You don't have to start in Abbott. And so, but I will start in Abbott, so for this next part. So moving on, the Abbott galleries are here in green. And this is where we feature the first 3 sections, which are on portraiture, gods and goddesses, and funerary art. This is not only the largest space of the exhibition itself, but it's also where we have the greatest number of works that were newly conserved for this presentation. And one other note we want to make about the themes in this particular space is that they are, to some extent, permeable. So you can have a funerary sculpture that also has portraits on it, for example. Okay. Now, portraiture. This is one of my most favorite things to work on. So apologies in advance if I really get into this because I just love portraits. Portraiture is just one of the strengths of the Torlonia Collection. And just to make this point, of the 622 works, about 200 are portraits. And with this section, we wanted to highlight how Romans would use these specific visual vocabularies to communicate different ideas of power and authority and a sense of Roman identity. So what we have in this section now are 19 portraits. And you might be wondering, how do you choose 19 from 200? Do we focus on the most notable historical names? Do we select the best portraits in terms of quality, the rarest? How do you go about this? And this was something that for Lisa and I, early on in this project, we really spent a lot of time familiarizing ourselves with the collection through inventories, and especially there is a 19th century catalog written by the collection's second curator, Carlo Ludovico Visconti, and thanks to the Internet Archive, it is all digitized and free. So thanks, Internet Archive. So the text and the plates are all available online, which was incredibly helpful for us to learn about just truly the entire collection as a whole. And so as we reviewed this, we really kind of we were our interest was piqued by the fact that there was really what we saw as a complete set of second century emperors and their wives. And this is something that we really kind of latched onto because the second century is a really fascinating period where, well, for one thing, it's the point when the empire reaches its greatest geographic extent. So it touches 3 continents, Europe, Africa, and Asia. It's also the period of the 5, quote unquote, good emperors who maybe weren't always so good. So, I mean, Hadrian, I'll say this guy right here, like razor's edge. I mean, he could have, you got to thank his successor, Antoninus Pius, which is the Pius in his name, is why Hadrian is a good emperor. But it was also this period where there was a huge surge in the production of sculpture, and this includes imperial portraits, which was intended to adorn the cities and structures of the expanding empire. But beyond that, we wanted to think a lot about what our audience, so all of you, what might resonate with our audiences, especially non-specialists, and what would be one's entry point into thinking about portraits of emperors and the imperial family. What would bring people to see these works in the museum? And so we arrive here. And I just want to say, so Lisa and I tag teamed this PowerPoint when we put it together. This is all Lisa, this slide, and I love it. Very compelling. I love the gladiator references. But again, we really thought a lot about, in terms of meeting visitors where they are, why not take advantage of the strengths of the Torlonia Collection and capitalize on the potential name recognition and familiarity from modern cinema and popular culture. And so you may be saying, okay, ding-dongs, why was Gladiator a factor in your decision-making? But again, I think we really have thought a lot about that this is how we think, I will say, in everything we do, and not just this exhibition, but everything as curators, we think so much about how we are presenting these objects to our visitors and what will be accessible and relevant. And so in this case, for us, besides from a historical and art historical standpoint, the second century is just a really interesting period. Again, we know anecdotally that names like Marcus Aurelius, not Richard Harris, and Commodus, Joaquin Phoenix, again, 2 of the emperors of that particular century do have some name recognition on a popular culture level with many of our visitors. And so as we thought about the portraits, one of the stories we wanted to explore was this issue of dynastic succession. And so a lot of this actually happened through adoptions, which you can see here, and I want to point out on this, this is a modified version of a graphic that is in the exhibition, but these dotted lines are what are signifying adoptions. And so the reason for these adoptions is that there was a lack of male heirs through the imperial bloodline. So succession had to happen through adoption and also through strategic marriages that could unite families. Now, these adoptions are not what we might think of today in terms of rearing a child and bringing them into your family as an act of love. This is something that's very administrative and political and often happens later in life. So you might be middle-aged and be adopted. And so in this particular gallery, we have this array of portraits, including all of the emperors you see here, including also their wives. And I'm going to come back to the issue of the wives shortly. But for now, I just want to make the point that the women, the imperial women, are in some instances are thought to have sometimes played a role in these adoptions. So for example, just to point to the family tree, Plotina up here, she and Trajan, her husband Trajan, who brought the empire to its greatest geographic extent, had no children of their own, but she very much favored Hadrian and had him marry, she arranged the marriage of Hadrian to Sabina, who's his grandniece. And then on Trajan's deathbed, there's sort of a story, you wonder how much truth is in the ancient literary sources, but there is a story that goes around that on Trajan's deathbed, Plotina sort of, took his hand and had him sign the adoption papers, and voila, Hadrian's the successor. So, it's interesting to wonder, how we've thought a lot about, for this exhibition, the soft power and the role of women within succession. And so just here, I do want to make a note about the exhibition design. Our brilliant exhibition designer and colleague, Richard Ferrer, Again, so much of this, the clean, modern look of the show, again, may look very modern, but it was very much also inspired by Roman art, which you can see. So in this particular instance, we have these family groupings at the left and at the center, but also even, which are still quite old, portraits like this example on the right, 16th century, but feels pretty new for those of us working in antiquity. But these images of families that are very carefully and strategically composed. So this is very serious, very reserved, dignified. There's no selfies happening here. And so, as you'll see in the exhibition, we have these family groupings, which are composed sort of, again, in groupings against these gray backdrops. Now, in focusing on portraits of the 2nd century, as I just mentioned, we really wanted to also explore the role of the wives of the emperors in succession. And I want to make a note here about nomenclature. So these women were not empresses. There is no Latin equivalent to the term emperor for women. Emperor comes from the Latin term imperator, which means commander of the military. So it's a military and to some extent political role. So there's no female equivalent of that. And so as we thought about the roles of these women who are still very much in the inner circle of the emperor, we thought a lot, how can we relate them to our world today? And we really see them in a way relating to the concept of the First Lady in the United States, where you have a woman who maybe doesn't hold a formal political office, but can still exert some level of influence or soft power purely by virtue of her access and close ties, in the case of the US, to the president, but in the Roman world, of course, the emperor. And this can be for good or bad. Also for Roman women, being that close to the emperor wasn't always sunshine and rainbows. You could also be in a position of peril depending on who's in charge. So one of these women who we're particularly excited to highlight in this exhibition is, as you can see here, excuse me, just giving you a preview of, is Faustina the Younger. And so she is someone who we like to talk about as really being the mortar holding the Antonine imperial family together. So she had a number of points of contact with emperors. She was the daughter, wife, mother, and mother-in-law of the 4 different emperors you see here. So she played a critical role in dynastic succession. And now when she was 8, her father, Antoninus Pius, at the far left here, had become emperor. So she spent almost her entire life in the imperial house. And she was arranged to be married to Marcus Aurelius, of course, as we've already seen, who she went on to have, and hold your seats here for a moment, 14 children, upwards of 14 children. One of those children was Commodus, and he was the first emperor to be born in the purple. And so this is a modern phrase that refers to the actual bloodline son of the reigning emperor and his wife. And so, again, not to keep coming back to Gladiator, but if you've seen it, you know that this is when things start to fall apart. And so, as Lisa aptly put it in her lecture last night, he is the OG Nepo baby gone wrong. He is a megalomaniac. He banishes his wife. Pretty much if you make him mad, you are dead. So bloodlines don't always work. But at any rate, here we see Faustina the Younger at the age, she's about 30 here. And she's really remarkable in the world of Roman portraiture because she was in the imperial house for so long, we see her really across most of her life. And this is one of her slightly later portraits made when she was around 30 years old. And it was probably created around the time of her husband's ascent to power, but it may have even been made in honor of the birth of one of her children, possibly her 11th or 12th child. And so her fecundity was really just renowned, and it was something that for her as an imperial mother was widely celebrated in imperial imagery. So sometimes her image is paired with goddesses of fertility like Venus and Ceres. And so here, I think one of the things we see with her is that she's really has this sort of esteemed, revered, Roman matron kind of thing going on here. And for Roman women in general, one of their biggest responsibilities in life was the production of children to ensure the continuity of their families, that they would go on for future generations. And for imperial women, there was that much more pressure on them because it also meant the continuation of the imperial line. And so she's sort of like the Roman woman writ large. And sticking with Faustina, our friend Faustina here for just a couple more minutes, I want to make the point here, too, that one of the really exciting things for Lisa and me with this project has been the fact that through new conservation and new research we've carried out in conjunction with the Torlonia Foundation, we've been able to re-identify some of these works now that we've had access to them in their newly clean state. So again, staying with Faustina here, she was originally identified as Lucilla, who is actually one of her daughters. And so, I won't go into the full stylistic minutiae about hairstyles and facial features here, but just trust me that this is something that I feel really confident in this re-identification, having spent a lot of time looking at Roman portraits. And in this regard, I want to thank Lisa for her willingness to go down the rabbit hole of all of the minutiae of hairstyles and the way eyes are rendered and all of these things, and to really think through these re-identifications. And so again, I think for both of us, one of the most exciting things about this project has just been that we've been part of this small group of individuals who are now beginning to re-examine these sculptures, and in this way, it's really just an honor for us to be part of this creation of new knowledge to help further the scholarship on the Torlonia Collection. Thank you. Just gonna take a water break for 1 second here. So after the portraits, you will go down the narrow hallway and you will head into the next room, where, as you can see, you're greeted by an array of statues of gods and goddesses. And for us, this was another section where we made a lot of additions in terms of the newly conserved works. And this is partly because we really wanted to just add more gods and goddesses. And the reason why was, again, kind of like the names like Marcus Aurelius and Commodus, we recognize that for our audiences, there is often a lot of name recognition here, thanks to, for example, the school curriculum in the United States, and especially in Illinois and the Chicago area. A lot of people from a young age know these names of Athena or Minerva, Apollo, Artemis, Diana, Mars, Ares. And so for us, we anticipate also that these are the kinds of, even just these images, these types of sculptures are often the kind of thing that might come to mind when someone says, like, hey, there's an exhibition of Roman sculpture. These are the kinds of things that people might want to see here. So again, we're really trying to meet visitors on some level where they are, but we want to take you beyond that. And so one other thing here, a note about the names. If you have been in the exhibition and looked at the labels, you will have seen that, of course, this is an exhibition almost entirely of Roman sculpture, but there are a lot of Greek names. So why all the Greek names? And so from an art historical standpoint, some of these sculptures have sort of earlier famed Greek types, and those names, like, for example, Crouching Aphrodite, they're very important to the way we study those objects today in scholarship. So we've retained those earlier Greek names. We weren't just sort of like, I don't know, sure, Aphrodite, So there was actually a conscious decision with that. And so one of the most important works, not only in this section of the exhibition, but really in the entire collection itself, is this statue. So it's a statue of a goddess, and its nickname is the Hestia Justiniani. And so this nickname goes back to the 17th century, again, when it was in an earlier prestigious collection, specifically that of the Italian banker Vincenzo Giustiniani, who had assembled a massive art collection in the 16th and early 17th centuries. And so Hestia, if you're not familiar with who that is, Roman world, she's known as Vesta. She's the goddess of the hearth. And she's maybe not the most exciting deity. She doesn't get out that much because she's got to tend to the hearth, and she's not depicted a whole lot in Roman art. And so, that is a question of why was she identified as such? Where does this name Hestia come from? And so our dear colleague, Jeff Nigro, research associate on this project, Lisa innocently asked the research question of when does this nickname get added to it? And Jeff, again, went down the rabbit hole, and I don't know where Jeff is, but he couldn't give you the full story, but Jeff did figured this one out, got it back to an 18th century reference. But at any rate, we retitled this object here to be a statue of a goddess known as the Hestia Justiniani, because we do think that in all likelihood she was probably one of the other primary female deities, maybe Juno or Demeter. And then one more point about this sculpture itself I want to make is just looking at it. So she might look very old-fashioned, and this is because that this is a Roman version, so made in the 2nd century, that is based on a Greek type known as the severe style, which was a style going back 6 centuries to about one decade where this style was popular in the Greek world, from 470 to 460. And the sculptures of this time are sort of very sober, very dignified. You've got this sort of squared-off drapery at her waist and these sort of columnar folds. I mean, if you look at this detail, it's almost by itself, it's like, is that a column? And so this is something, that, again, would have looked really old to an ancient viewer, maybe the way we might look at, like, an early Renaissance painting today. And it's something that was probably based on a much earlier bronze original sculpture that was originally created in the Greek world. And one last point about her. She is one of the other really amazing, outstanding things about this sculpture is that she's almost entirely intact. And this is something you can see from the conservation diagram. And I will say that just the parts in blue are modern restorations, so modern meaning like primarily 17th to 19th centuries. This is incredibly rare for an object like this that's almost 2,000 years old to be so complete. And I just also want to make the point here that within the exhibition, every single Torlonia object is accompanied by a diagram illustrating which parts are ancient, which are ancient but not original, and which are modern. And for Lisa and me, we really felt very strongly that it was so important to include these diagrams to help our visitors sort of easily make sense of these different phases. Otherwise, I mean, we could be here all day sort of explaining like, well, this part is 19th century. And, so, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And then moving on to another really fascinating sculpture. This is new to our presentation. This is a statue of Athena, who has some more modern restorations, which you can see here to the arms, the head, and the spear. And what's really interesting, and again, what came out of the research working with the Torlonia Foundation, this is her third head. And how do we know this? So the first one obviously would have been her ancient head. And her second head, she had a different head. She was another work from the prestigious Giustiniani collection. And through archival documentation, we know that there was a different type of head. And then at some point in the 19th century, when this entered the Torlonia collection, is when she seems to have gotten this particular head. And again, a note about the name. We use Athena here. We don't call her Roman name Minerva, because this type is based on the cult statue of Athena Parthenos from the Parthenon. So again, a very just, iconic, renowned statue in the ancient world and much earlier. And now, this is not the only Athena in the area. What's really interesting is that just 4 miles from here, at another institution at Wrightwood 659, there is another Athena sculpture that was recently installed, which also has historic restorations. And it's the piece on the right, you can see here, known as the Halstead Athena. And, it's really a historic moment for us here in Chicago that there isn't just one really amazing Athena statue, but 2. Both are Roman, both have restorations from the 19th century, and they're just a few miles apart. And this is something, we've talked about for our friends and colleagues in Italy, where there, to this day, there really is a wealth of sculptures like this, especially in museums. For us, this is really an exceptional moment to see these two in the same city. One thing we really just loved about both of these is that you'll see both of them have in their outstretched hand an owl, like just a sweet little owlet. And the owl is a symbol of Athena, and we see it sometimes, for example, on coins of Athena from the earlier Greek world, but not like standing Athena holding an owl. It's an owl just by itself. And so in the case of the Torlonia Athena, it has this added meaning because the owl itself is also a symbol of the Torlonia family. But it's interesting that we see this also on the Halstead Athena because it's not an attribute that Athena normally holds in Roman sculpture. And so this has been something for us that, we have a lot of follow-up research questions even just coming out of the work we've done for this exhibition. So it's really interesting for us to think about why do we see this as a 19th century restoration in both works? Is it something just from the taste of that time that restorers were like, this is a great thing to add here? Did these restorers know each other? did one go, hey, that's cool, I'm going to do that too? We don't know, but it's something that we're really excited about, the prospect of continuing the study of these objects, that again, this is just sort of like the next phase, and there's still so much more to do. And then moving on to the final section of the Abbott Galleries is with the biggest objects. So this is a major theme, and major meaning not just in terms of the number of objects, because the Torlonia Collection has a lot of funerary art, but also in terms of the size and scale of these objects. So these photos, I will say, don't do these objects justice. They are some of the biggest sculpted marble objects from the Roman world. We really do not see things of this scale in the US. And even in places like Italy, objects, these large-scale funerary monuments are still quite rare. And so this particular example we're seeing here, these actually go together. So this is a sarcophagus on the right and a lid, so a stone coffin and a lid. And it's a style that is among the largest of all the Roman sarcophagi. They were produced in Asia Minor, so modern-day Turkey. And here we have, in the one on the left, the lid has portraits. These are they're restorations, but they're ancient, but later added. So not the original individuals, but still ancient heads. And then on the actual sarcophagus itself, we have imagery of the 12 labors of Hercules. And so that's actually can be very fitting as imagery for a funerary monument, because of Hercules as a demigod and sort of, completing his labors and becoming a god, sort of conquering death. Now, together, these two objects, if the lid was on the sarcophagus, would weigh over 12,000 pounds. And so for the safety of the two objects, but also, of course, for visitors, for the staff installing these, we've decided to make the decision to display them side by side. And I want to say this is another really important factor that we as curators, and we work with our colleagues here in the museum in terms of the designers, the art handlers, everything, we have to think about of how much does an object weigh? How are we going to get it in the building, in a crate? How do we get it into the gallery? And then how do we get it into place? And assuming we can do all that, can the floor even structurally handle the object, but also the equipment that is needed to move it? And so this project did require a lot of, logistical gymnastics. But I think, we had numerous engineering reviews of the floor, what weight it could handle. And so it was, really just a feat to get these objects here and into the building. And I think, it also makes you wonder not only how these were moved into the Torlonia Collection in the 19th century, but before that, how are these moved in antiquity? So, all of this is something that in any of these ages, we really have thought about as, and excuse the pun here, but this is a Herculean effort. So. And of course, not all of the monuments are huge. One of the newly conserved objects for this project is this fragment of a funerary monument for a young boy. For us, it was really important in studying this. It is one of the pieces that actually does have an inscription, which you can see in the red box here. And so the inscription helps us identify the boy. We know that his name is Gaius Marcius Crescens. And now, when Lisa and I looked at the inscription, we both took plenty of Latin. And as Lisa generously acknowledged, that I have some experience with Latin, particularly Latin nerd, but it is rusty. And beyond that, Latin literature and poetry is not the same as Latin epigraphy. So inscriptions, their own special beast. And so we recognized, let's call in the professionals here. I'm gonna phone a friend. And we partnered with the classics department at Northwestern, specifically Dr. Francesca Tatarini, who very graciously agreed to help us with this. And so she was able to identify, sort of retranslate and transliterate the inscription. And there's one other piece she also worked on for the show. There are two works with inscriptions. Neither one had been reconsidered since at least 1978. And one of Francesca's, one of her corrections, which is we've been so excited to incorporate into this, is to his age. So now you might think, is that a typo? If you know Roman numerals, because it's XIII, not XIV, and this is VIII. And so that is actually accurate. We were both like, is that right? And she was like, actually, it is correct, yes. So we know with those numbers right there that he died at 14 years and 9 hours. And so there's something, very touching and very, very sad about the way his family has commemorated him here. But again, this project has been really wonderful because it's helped, again, contribute to the creation of new scholarship. Moving to the next gallery, as you can see here on the plan, which is labeled for photography, film, and media. So this is, again, a gallery that normally does not see sculptures. And in fact, normally it has the windows closed, but we have been able to open it for this special exhibition. And we want to thank our colleagues in photo and media for so generously allowing us to use this space, because otherwise I don't know where we would have put all these sculptures. But, and so it's really been transformed by exposing these windows, bringing natural daylight in, allowing a lot of these objects to be seen more closely to how they would have been seen in antiquity, in the context of having actual light. And here in this gallery, we have several Torlonia-specific themes. And these are really for us to explore the idea that the Torlonia Collection has always been in private hands, and it offers a really unique lens on Roman sculpture. So those themes are icons, historic restoration, and excavations. And just briefly, one more design feature we wanted to point out here is this element at the center, which again seems to be very modern and clean, but Richard, our designer, was so thoughtful here in his design because he borrows from ancient architecture, specifically the design of the circus at the right, so for chariot racing, but also from the forms of spaces like the Forum of Trajan, so Imperial Fora. And I think it's just a really, very clean and modern and very subtle way of acknowledging this. And then one last word on design. We really wanted to use color strategically in a way that felt very fresh and engaging. We didn't want to do anything that someone might just assume or expect with an ancient art exhibition. Lisa and I were very adamant about no Roman red and mustard yellow. Yes, these are very common colors of Roman wall paintings, lots of red ochres, yellow ochres. But we just, again, with our mission to sort of avoid trying to sort of recreate the past, we wanted to bring the objects forward. But we still look to ancient art for inspiration. Specifically, and if any of you have seen this in person, you know how striking it is, the painted garden room of the Villa of Livia, which is in Rome at the Palazzo Massimo alla Terme. And you have a much richer array of colors here, and these also figure to some extent into our exhibition catalog. But our visual design team really looked to the Pantone book, and they found this range of colors, which you can find in the exhibition in very subtle ways. One of which, and I will say this is hard to see in the slide, but if you see it in the galleries, you'll see there's this pop of green behind the big panels that project out. If you have a moment, you can kind of like peek behind and look. It's like a green vinyl, and it just creates this sort of glowing effect. And we really want to thank our colleague, Christine Zavesky. It was just an absolutely brilliant idea. We love this subtle pop of color. But this sort of range of colors here will appear, as you've probably seen, in all sorts of wayfinding, the banners on the front of the museum, signs on the street, the press, everything. So this is the sort of, the greens and the purples we've selected. And then moving to the artworks themselves, when you go into Buxbaum, you find the three of the most iconic pieces in the Torlonia collection. They're among the earliest works, and they truly are icons because they are so rare, important, and early. And these, again, are so rare and so important, they are literally in textbooks. I can still, actually, we had our Italian colleagues here from the foundation a few weeks ago and for the installation, and I went to my office and I grabbed like all the books, and I was like, here, here's where we see these in our textbooks. And in fact, even some of our other curatorial colleagues here at the Art Institute and other departments have flat out called this idea that, like, I remember this. A week or two ago, my dear colleague Liz McGoey, who's the Ann S. and Samuel M. Menkoff Curator in Arts of the Americas, came down to have a look with me, and she looked at him and said, I know this piece. I remember it from Art History Survey. And it's just, again, this is the sheer power of these objects. They stay with people, years after they've studied them in one course. And one final point on him, we worked with a lighting designer on this exhibition, Anita Jorgensen and her team, who are absolutely fantastic. And the need with this piece, because it is so unusual as a type, it's a type that is intending to stress age as a sign of maturity and wisdom. And Lisa had given her the directive very late one evening of, we need to see the wrinkles, more wrinkles. So just enjoy every wrinkle in the galleries with him. Two more pieces of this collection are really iconic for a different reason. Both of these, they were works created by two famous earlier sculptors, Pietro Bernini on the left, and his son Gian Lorenzo Bernini, who, is just the most important sculptor of the Baroque era, if you've ever heard of him. But these are works that, of course, when these works are thousands of years old, their appearances can change. I mean, just like our appearances, of course. And so for this exhibition, we really wanted to stress that these restorations are just such an important part of an object's biography. And in some instances like these, when the restorations are carried out by very prestigious sculptors, they actually enhance their overall effect and artistic value. So looking at the goat in particular, I really encourage you, if you're in the galleries, we've elevated him, and you just can be at eye level, and he has the most just lively and animated expression. It's something that it just people really respond to, and we've talked a lot about the fact that, this particular piece, the goat, was noted even before it was in the Torlonia Collection in travel diaries and guides to Rome from the 17th and 18th centuries. And we've talked a lot about this fact that, would people be writing about a headless goat? They were probably writing about it after Bernini had already added the restorations. And so in this way, the object is, we like to think of it not just as something that was restored, but as something that's a really thoughtful collaboration between the ancient sculptor and the modern sculptor responding to it. And moving along, but sometimes later hands can get things a little bit wrong from a narrative perspective. So we have this Aphrodite with Eros, which is her son, also known as Cupid, and Akitos. And so Akitos is basically like a sea monster. If you're familiar with the story of Perseus and Andromeda, the monster that Perseus has to slay is Akitos. And so in this one, what was curious to us was that Aphrodite is usually shown with a dolphin because she's born from the sea. We're like, why the heck would this be Akitos? That's just weird. And well, it turns out that once we received the conservation diagrams and reports from the foundation, we realized that this was a restoration. So most likely at some point in antiquity, this was in fact a dolphin that was sort of recarved to look like a different type of sea creature. But then sometimes there are some liberties that happen. So here we have Harpocrates, or as he was previously known, but we've retitled him Statue of a Boy, restored as Harpocrates. And so just to sort of break this down for you, the body is a young boy. The head, the pink head, is an ancient head of a girl that was put on his body. And then all of the blue elements are restorations made to complete him and to make him depict the Ptolemaic god Harpocrates. Of course, I'm not an Egyptologist, but I can at least tell you that Harpocrates is based on Horus, and he's the son of Isis and Osiris. And he's a child god who gained a lot of popularity, and Egypt and his iconography spread to Rome. And this gesture with his hand to his mouth was misinterpreted by Romans, and they thought him to be a god of secrecy and silence, even though the actual hieroglyph means child. So this is one of these really wonderful objects that has these just different parts, different phases. So moving to the idea of excavations, on one of our several research trips to Rome for this project, I know everyone's like, oh no, you had to go to Rome multiple times. Boo-hoo, of course, we're thrilled. But we realized as we became familiar with these objects and we were learning about the Torlonia properties, we were like, we need to just get out there and see these places. And we put on our rain boots and we put on our raincoats and we tromped through fields and we followed goats. Like, no joke, there was a caravan of goats one day going down the Via Appia Antica, and there's everywhere and bells. It was kind of surreal. And so we spent a lot of time, going to these places, and Lisa's husband, Adrian, joined us. In fact, he's the one who ran ahead and got this action shot. And here we are at Ostia, which is the original harbor city that another object you're about to see named Portus, that this was the original harbor city that Portus grew out of. And so getting to this object, this is one that is just a really another important, iconic work in the collection. It depicts the ancient port of Rome, because in Latin, portus means port. Maybe not the most inventive name, but gets the job done. So this, as you can see, is a harbor scene, and how do we know that it's portus and not just some other harbor? And this is where I just, like, the first time we saw this, I was like fangirling all over it, like, oh my God, it's the portus relief. And it's because of this stepped lighthouse. It's a symbol of portus. And we also see it at its sister city, Ostia. Ostia is where I did my dissertation research, so I've seen this lighthouse everywhere, and I just, like, was so excited. And we also see it here a second time. It's way up here in the top left corner. That's the genius or sort of spirit of the city of Portus. He wears a Portus lighthouse crown. And so you can see here, I can't get into it today, but this object is just chock-a-block with imagery. And now, there was no way we could explain this object in a label in 80 to 100 words. And, like, we're good, our interpretation team is amazing, but, like, this is just beyond the scope of 80 to 100 words. So what we did was we created a video working with our experience design team, and created this video that helps sort of unpack the features of the relief. And also it begins with this sort of reconstruction of the harbor itself, which actually was this hexagonal shape, which was built under the Emperor Trajan to help boats sort of sail in and be safe. And so this is something that not only is in the galleries, it's also on the museum's YouTube channel. So please check it out. And then just kind of moving into the very last bit of my talk, I want to mention, of course, the exhibition has a third space. And this is something that is very unique to our presentation. And here we explore the idea of series and multiples. And again, this goes into our permanent galleries. And you can see this here. We have one really big guy, the statue of an unfinished station. And even though initially we were like, he doesn't have the most direct connection to multiples, this was partly he's so big, if you've seen, it's like almost 9 feet tall. We had to put him here for space reasons, but which this didn't make it into the label, but also after the fact, we were also like, well, but he was one of many of a type that probably adorned Trajan's Forum. So technically he's a multiple, even though we don't have two of him. But the ones we do have multiples of, we were really excited, this is something unique to the Chicago presentation, is that we've been able to pair works from the Torlonia Collection with prestigious long-term loans to our museum. And so here we have one of these where we're looking at two versions of a very clear type. So the version on the left is the Torlonia example, and the version on the right is the one that's been here since 2017. And you can see here that they share very much the same composition with Leda. Leda was a queen of Sparta, and Zeus transformed into a swan to try to seduce her. That's sort of the short version of the story. She has her left foot raised on a footstool. She has this sort of drapery, cascading. Zeus in the form of a swan, sort of resting on her thigh. I like to think of this as like, it's like a highlights magazine, like spot the difference. Like what's different in each? I seriously, I have a 6-year-old daughter, and it's like, but when you look at the heads, you can see there's a subtle difference in the angles. So the version on the right that's been here in Chicago, the head is integral to the body. The version on the left from Torlonia, the head is modern. So we don't know if the modern sculptor wanted it at that orientation, if it was a misunderstanding, but I think there's something really interesting there that seeing these very subtle differences on a type. And then in contrast to the Ledas, we also have another grouping that has sort of variations on a broader type, a more generic subject, not based on a very clear earlier Greek statue, which is the case with the Leda and the Swan grouping. So these are different types of satyrs. Satyrs are part human, part goat followers of the wine god Dionysus, known to Romans as Bacchus. And they're here both shown holding a wineskin. So the Torlonia example on the left is a Silenus, which is an old satyr. And the one on the right, you can see, has this very muscular, slim torso. He's a young satyr. And so for Romans, they might have even had two of these in the same place, maybe in a villa, maybe as garden sculpture. These are the kinds of things that, because of their associations with Dionysus and Bacchus, could reinforce themes of drinking and dining and celebrating. Romans really loved to show off when they knew and could spot the distinctions between different types of objects, could recognize their earlier origins. So you could have very well had two of these in the same spot. So we like this idea of having the sort of old version and the young version. And then really just to wrap up here, the last thing I want to point out is in the midst of all of this, we also published an exhibition catalog. And it's the first catalog written in English to accompany a Torlonia exhibition. And it's something we're just incredibly proud of. It's intended for non-specialist audiences. It includes several essays, as well as gorgeous new photography of all 58 objects. And something that we're especially proud of is that it makes an important new scholarly contribution to the field because we have detailed conservation notes on all 58 objects. And so I also want to thank our amazing book designers, James Goggin and Shan James of Practice, that's Practice with an S. They really took our early discussions and just ran with our ideas. We told them we wanted, again, a very modern feel. And this typeface we have here, which you've also seen throughout the exhibition, so James redrew this by hand. It is something that is based on the typeface in novels from the 1970s by Italo Calvino. So this is something that it still makes me laugh. James, at one point, when he had to draw the ampersand, he told our editor, Nora McGreevy, who's just wonderful, he said, "It's my favorite glyph." And so every time I look at an ampersand, I think that now, it's my favorite glyph. So, this is an instance, though, because that typeface is just so striking and feels so ancient and contemporary at the same time, it really drove the visuals for the exhibition. So again, you see it in the title walls, it's everywhere. And so again, we just also really want to thank the amazing publishing team for their incredible work on this catalog, and of course our editor Nora and her truly eagle eye. And then I also just want to put in a plug that you can buy this for the low price of $40 in both of our shops. And so to conclude today, you can see, of course, I've only begun to scratch the surface on some of the fascinating objects in the Torlonia collection, the multitude of portraits, the impressive full-length statues of gods and goddesses, the massive and magnificent funerary monuments, and the rare and unusual reliefs. I think I can speak for Lisa when I say we are truly so incredibly thrilled and honored to be able to present these objects from the storied Torlonia Collection here in Chicago as they make their North American debut. And as you visit the exhibition, we truly hope you enjoy exploring the many unique stories these objects can tell us about both their ancient pasts and their modern afterlives. Thank you.